It's exactly 11 o'clock in the studios of Classic 105.5 and 105.9. And welcome back. Well, not welcome back, because you've always been there with us. Again, a special good morning again to those of you that's on radio, Classic 105.5 and 105.9. A special and warm good morning to those of you that's joining us from the comfort and luxury of Garfin. And I can well appreciate why you're joining us this morning. We say thank you and welcome to the televised edition of this morning's program. And we have with us this morning Lady Munroe and Mr. Fletcher. Just to give you some context, October is Financial Information Month, and for the entire month we've had different organizations that has been coming with us to understand the environment that we live in, and certainly understanding the need to be conscious and cognizant of our ability to save. In this case, Garfin, we can understand the role of Garfin. Who's Garfin? What do they do? And how do they keep us safe in the context of what happens locally, regionally, and across the world? My dear sir and lady, good morning. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you.
Wonderful. And we were just chatting before, and I just want to be able to share that with you. And it's important that while we had nothing with Garfin, but I was speaking initially to these young people, and we were making some very important points separate from what Garfin does, but we're highlighting the need and importance of parents taking responsibility in ensuring that their children go on the right path, Lady Munroe.
Yes, for sure. Yes, we were talking about the role that parents need to play and understanding that we live in a changing society, and sometimes those societal norms or developing norms conflict with what we believe is right. And so we as parents, we just can't allow society all the time to lead the children in one direction. We have to stand in the gap between that, and we have to be able to ensure that our children, stay true to what is morally astute and correct.
And Fletcher, you would agree that as men, that we need to, I always often say that we always need to tell our boys, our young men, that we love them. Yes. And then you connect to them. Because you say, if you lose a child at the age of 9, that's it. That's it, yeah. At any stage you lose them, there's no coming back.
Yeah. And it's important to let the boys know that you love them. It's important. If they have problems, feelings, that it's okay to let out those feelings. They don't have to try and be the tough guy all the time. They can confide in daddy, speak to daddy. You will listen, you will understand, you will help, you will give advice. Very important.
That's why you daddy's boy, and daddy loves you with all of his heart. Yes, folks, you probably wondered, no, we're not off on a tangent. I just thought it necessary while it was a private conversation, but ever so often we need to let the general public understand as we wrap up Child's Month as well. This it is the reason why you're here. October, it's a busy month. Cancer this, observance of Cancer Month, there's Child's Month, and certainly we're wrapping up Financial Information Month. Garfin, we heard a name, we've heard of the agency. But if Fletcher, somebody should ask you one day when you traverse it home, where do you work? And you say Garfin. I'm like, Garfin? What is Garfin?
What is Garfin, right? So Garfin stands for the Grenada Authority for the Regulation of Financial Institutions, right? We're a statutory body created in operating from 2007, and we're the regulator and supervisor of the non-bank financial sector in Grenada. So when I say regulator, we ensure that our entities are in compliance with the Act, do everything the Act says to do, and they're not doing things that the Act says they should not do. And when we say supervisor, we're going to look at their operations, their financial performance, their capital, their operations, the quality of their risk management. So from those two dynamics, Garfin oversees the non-bank financial sector.
So you do financial police?
In a sense, yes.
Financial police as to scare people off or waiting for them to do wrong, but you create an enabling environment that allows for standardization in what happens and ensure that you comply as well with international regulations as part of that goal.
Yes.
Okay, so expand for me. So let's talk about some of you on a day-to-day basis, Lady Munroe. What do you do at Garfin? So I come and I see you, and what do you do? And how does what you do fall into the bigger picture ambit of Garfin's role and responsibility?
Right. So if you break down what Mr. Fletcher just explained in terms of monitoring and responsibility to ensure that compliance is kept, a number of things are done. There are standard things that we do. For example, monitoring is very much ongoing. We don't just monitor when we go on site, but there's a lot that goes on internally. You would imagine and can appreciate that we are responsible for reviewing, assessing, analyzing financial data, and that spans from the credit unions to pensions to insurance to money services. So it takes a lot. So we have to analyze these information. We have to look to see if there are any kinks in those information. If there are, those need to be immediately reported. We sit a lot in conjunction with our director to report these issues so that we can, mitigate. Mitigation is a big part of what we do, and you can do that effectively if you monitor effectively.
And I'm assuming as part of that big conversation, there's a lot of partners that you work with locally and externally?
Yes. So internally, we are a regulator for the non-bank sector. We would also work along with the AML Commission as needed. If we need to work with the FIU as well, we would work with them. Regionally, there are equivalents of Garfin in every ECCU territory. So there's a non-bank regulator, a national non-bank regulator in the other 7 ECCU territories. The securities regulator, the Eastern Caribbean Securities Regulatory Commission, the ECSRC, our Central Bank, the ECCB. We all meet quarterly at a regulatory oversight committee to discuss issues, form working groups to elevate best practices and move regulation and supervision forward. And for areas like insurance, particularly insurance, where we have a lot of multinational entities, we work as well with other regional regulators across the Caribbean in cross-sectoral supervision, cross-border supervision, and dealing with issues, colleges, regulatory colleges, and so on.
Let's break it down a bit further, because personally I'll be thinking, oh boy. Businesses, credit unions, banks, they have their day-to-day functions. So what are some of the things that you would do, regulations that you want to ensure that, let's say, the banks, whatever other financial institution, regulations that you keep tabs on that will ensure in terms of what they do and how they interact with the general public?
Well, one of the guidelines that we follow are the Pearl standards.
And what standards?
Pearl standards. They are guidelines.
Standards.
So they are guidelines that speak to key performance indicators, specific, in this case, to credit unions, for example. So there are some key things that we look at with respect to your capital threshold. That's critical because it underpins the existence and the performance of the various institutions. We monitor that. We look at the capital. We also want to look at performance in terms of surplus generation. We tend to look at things like cost impact as well. We also play a very large role in terms of what those credit unions do with respect to members. Members from time to time do also have access to Garfin if there are issues, things that they are not understanding, things that they feel they need to submit for further investigation, clarification. All of these things play a role in how we interact with those systems to ensure that they do what they do. We also follow our act. Our act says what are expected of directors, for example, what are expected of members, what to do if there are certain situations that are going off base. Right. So all of these things are looked at on a daily basis, and even more so, particularly when significant things happen within the context of the broader society, like Hurricane Beryl, for example.
Yes. If you can, is there any example, any practical example that you can share with the general public in terms of what you would do in terms of working with those organizations to ensure compliance?
Well, okay, so you want to go ahead, Mr. Fletcher?
Well, in terms
I can
of
share
compliance,
some.
So, as Mrs. Munroe said, we will assess them against the Act, right? So, if there are issues, let's say the capital is not where it's supposed to be, or the liquidity is falling low and it's getting tight, or it has actually fallen below benchmarks, we would reach out to the entity. We can have prudential meetings with them to discuss our way forward, to agree on our way forward. We can also issue instructions to them, right? So let's say there's a liquidity issue, we could say to them, you cannot issue any new loans until you have gotten this problem under control. You can do things necessary for the operation of the institution, pay expenses, salaries, and the like, but granting new loans will have to stay on hold until you can remedy that situation. So that's an example of some of the things we do to ensure compliance. I mean, if it reaches to a stage where things continue to deteriorate, each of the respective acts would have like a lot of escalation built in, so that you can bring it up to and including the point of the institution being deregistered. They can no longer carry on business because they would no longer have a license.
So what, in terms of your day-to-day operation, it is guided by the act, so you do not just randomly decide, you know what, let me check up on those boys and see what is it that they're up to. There are strict rules of engagement.
Yes.
And that's an important point, because sometimes in the execution of your duties, it can be perceived. It can be perceived as such, but it's really important for the public to understand that we are arbiters of the act. We are administrators of the act. The act sets the tone for what good behavior is supposed to be like. When we go into those institutions, one of the ways that we interact with those institutions as well is by doing what we call on-site examinations. We go in and we investigate. We investigate the books. We investigate your loans. We investigate key things, investments. And all of that is not just done in conjunction with the act, but it's also done in conjunction with policies that were developed by those by board members. And so when information is produced, it is purely produced from a fact-based position, from what your policy says, from what the act expects. And then this is where we can have the discussion as to, well, if something is failing here, this is what we need to do. And the act helps to provide all of these instructionals so that subjectivity, as far as is possible, is distanced from the process.
Yeah, and in addition to the act as well, we also have we also fully implementing our risk-based supervisory framework. So in addition to the mandates and the edicts that are in place in the act, we also assess risk. The areas of risk, the areas of greatest concern. So in credit union, credit risk because of loans is a high risk as well. Cybersecurity risk is another risk that is, as more and more things are conducted online. So we look at areas of risk. Insurance companies, we have a tendency to look at the claims because that's an area of concern as well. Receivables. So we look at the risk. The risk may not even be the same across each entity, but we have a focus on the risks as well. And if we've seen things going awry in high-risk areas, then we're definitely going to intervene quickly.
And those risks that we speak of can be those that legitimately come about by, I guess, marketplaces, activity within the market, forces within the market, as well as individuals who want to manipulate the system. Let's talk about that because it is an ever-growing conversation that we have. What sort of precaution would you give to an individual who is interested in doing business with a financial organization locally that's established that or probably even one, as you talk about that increasing ever environment online.
Right. So before you go into business, you must understand what you're getting yourself into. So do a little research about the entity. Who are they? Where they are? Are they licensed? Right? So in Grenada, it will be very easy to know who is licensed and where they are licensed. So like the banks, you could check ECCB. Any securities business operating in the region is the ECSRC, and everything else as financial businesses should be licensed by Garfin. So don't be afraid to ask them for the license, right? Or to do your own research, check websites, and you can even call us to find out. And before you get into business with any entity, understand what they're offering, understand the terms and conditions, make sure you know. Don't be afraid to seek external advice, and don't ever feel pressured to do anything, let's say now or before the day closes, or it is your business. You are the customer. You have the right to determine that I need more time. I'm not signing this until I'm comfortable. You have that right to seek further guidance. For things outside of Grenada, what as you said, what came to my mind, I mean, I got a text a few months ago offering me something in crypto, right? And I laughed because I said, of all people you're going to contact, you will contact the regulator to tell me about crypto. And I had one before about Forex, right? I just told them they back it up the wrong tree and to leave my people alone. But these are the things that happen, and you have to know, right, when you see these things, who is licensing them? if I were to invest and something happens, who's protecting me? How am I going to get back my money? Who's making sure that these entities are operating above board? So when you get contact from these foreign numbers, right, ask these questions, right? Because if you invest, you may very well be putting your money at your own risk, because Garfin wouldn't have jurisdiction to protect you, neither Garfin, the ECSRC, or ECCB. So it's always good to know who is the regulator, who is protecting me, and what am I getting into.
The only thing I would add to, as Mr. Fletcher was talking, locals, right, our own people, we tend to have this tendency to disassociate from all of the things around us that affect us. Right. So some of the key things I would tell people that, especially if you have a small business, or especially if you're trying to get into a financial transactions, know who CAIPO is and what they do. Know who IRD is and what they do. Right. Understand what are tax implications, what does it mean to you, and know who your regulators are. These are just 4 simple ways. You don't need to know everything. Yes, there are laws that are easily accessible, but sometimes a person may go online, read along, not understand what it means. Yeah. Call into those entities and have a conversation. It's really important, because we're finding that a lot of people are involved in the market, and as Mr. Fletcher was alluding to, particularly crypto, bitcoins. These are things that people are just blasting. LinkedIn, all sorts of proper social media platforms. There are people everywhere offering quote unquote opportunities to make money. Yeah. But you can't get into these things, especially those that are foreign based, if you don't have a solid understanding as to what is happening.
So I guess if you would agree, the general rule of thumb is you do not behave that you at least you want basic information.
Yes, at the very least.
Definitely.
And don't ever be in a rush to get
at
into
the very least.
a financial agreement with any organization.
Any organization.
Unless you satisfied.
Yes, that's key.
Yeah.
Unless you're satisfied.
Yeah.
Savings Union. Everybody has a little savings union here. Savings union here at the school. What's Garfin doing in that area?
Well, listen, it's interesting because savings union is a much bigger thing than perhaps most adults recognize, except the parents of those children or children in the schools. We have like 84 schools on record, and 77 active schools, and there's a whopping just about $2 million in terms of deposits based for these savings unions. So it is a big deal, speaking relatively. And the Junior Cooperative Societies bylaw actually speaks to the objects, and two of the key objects are one, that you want to encourage thrift, and also that you want to help children to understand the guise of money management, what is smart money management. So it's a great opportunity there. We do actually have a platform whereby children at a very tender age can understand the value of money, and it opens them up as well to the cooperative structure, something that we do in terms of how we supervise the credit unions. So the junior co-op is really designed to be many credit unions in a sense. So it helps the children to understand cooperatives, what is the power, the role of cooperatives, and what they can benefit from it. So yeah, we also provide supervision. It means that we go to those schools. We do on-site examinations. We hold the teacher guides accountable. We engage with them. We discuss with them if there are issues there in terms of where the finance is supposed to be. If we're not seeing where it is, if it's actually there are things that we can do in terms of ensuring that things are done properly. So this is a really big part of what we do as well. It's smaller in the sense when you look at it compared to insurance and credit unions, but it's big in terms of where we are talking about schools.
Another thing that is big, and we tend to not treat it that way. SUSU. What is Garfin's role and responsibilities, if any at all, when it comes to the management of SUSU? SUSUs. I've had a lot of some telling stories.
Well, SUSU is an informal arrangement at the heart of it, right?
Yes.
And it's something that's built on trust among the members of the SUSU. So there's no act, there's not a SUSU act. SUSU is not covered under any act, legislation, arrangement. So Garfin does not have any authority over SUSU. So if you're in a SUSU or you want to get into a SUSU, you're doing so at your own risk, first of all. So the same principles apply, right? Know who you're getting into the SUSU with, right? Understand the risks, right? Know that you really and truly you don't have any recourse from a regulator, right? So you need to know, and I mean, the SUSU, even if it's an informal arrangement, I mean, proper record keeping, proper, arrangements to collect the money and so on would be essential, to ensuring that, when your time comes, you could actually get your hand, right? And that the first two hands don't go and then susu mash up, and then you don't know what's going on. So the same principles apply, even though it's an unregistered activity. The same sort of prudence
needs to be applied. Yeah,
needs to be applied.
If you shouldn't have a problem if you ask them to see in the middle of, let me see how much money, what is happening, if there's any hesitancy. But certainly not Garfin, but maybe I guess FI.
Well,
police.
If there's an issue, I'm sure you could go to law enforcement as well with that. But I think that may have to be your only recourse. Again, it may be good to have some documentation.
It's important,
because if you are going to the police, then it's your word against mine and all of those things. So it might be good to have a documentation where everybody signs. And it's also good to know not just the person running the SUSU, but who else is in the SUSU with me. You may assess the persons and just look and see whether you're comfortable with this arrangement.
Yeah, and I'm asking in the context that SUSU is something that is part of the Grenadian culture.
Yes.
If you have never been in a SUSU in Grenada,
you're not Grenadian, right?
You're not a Grenadian. Straight up. Straight up.
I've been involved in a SUSU at a previous job. Like I ran a SUSU. Maybe over 100 or 200 employees, but it was like, I don't want to say it was like we had it almost like a business. So there was a form and you had to sign and we had an agreement. So if you couldn't pay, you would authorize the employer to deduct from your salary. And there was a system to allocate the hands. You had to dip. Right, so we try to have everything fair and documented and legit.
It's not like me. If you ask me if I want to be in a SUSU, the answer is yes. And me, I always want the first hand.
Most people do. It's the safest hand.
I want the money up. I want to see it. I give you a payback over the money. But it's important that we want to help you, the general public, to appreciate that if it looks fishy, there's any concerns you have, you know what? It's better to step back. It's better to be safe than sorry. We just went through and we still reading from the impacts of Beryl. And a lot of financial organizations, some have been going through a difficult time. What has been Garfin's role is to ensure that these organizations, financial institutions, that all is well, and they following orders, and you're there with them to hold their hand as they transition.
Right. So after the passage of Hurricane Beryl, right, the same evening we would have reached out to all the general insurance companies. So that are those companies that would insure the motor vehicles, the home, the property, the vessels, in terms of marine and so forth. And we would have reached out to them and asked them to give us the assurance that they have systems in place to handle claims, to adjudicate claims and so forth. And we got that from all of them. Let us know they contacted their reinsurers, right, who are the entities that would provide additional coverage to the insurer, right, to allow them to give the amount of insurance capacity that they do. So we had that assurance from them. We would have registered international adjusters. Those are the people that would go and assess the properties and so forth, and they're like an impartial assessor, right, to ensure that the policyholders are treated fairly. We also continue to monitor the claim settlement process and engage with companies in that regard. One company told us they would have paid at that point in time over 2 million in claims, another told us over 4 million, right? But we continue to monitor, we continue to assess the books of the insurance companies, make sure that unpaid claims are not building up, and we continue to engage with them in terms of the claims payments generally, and also for Hurricane Beryl as well.
With respect to the credit union sector, because they are secondary to the insurance, so I mean, of course, Garfin moves swiftly with the insurance, and I think we're generally satisfied with how those insurers have moved and those companies have moved. But with respect to the credit unions, we would have had prudential meetings, and that's one way of us holding hands, if so to speak, to be able to kind of hear the concerns. What are the challenges? How is the credit union challenged, and what, if any, concessions are you potentially may potentially need, and we were well positioned and poised to be ready to grant them those permissions if necessary. I think in most cases, because Grenada itself was not directly hit, some parts higher up the island, like to the north of the island, you're talking about smaller rural-based credit unions, the people who are there, farmers and so forth. It has been a little bit more difficult because of the impact to the agricultural sector, but we are presently awaiting assessments. In some cases, have received assessments from some of them, and we are ready and willing to lend the support as regulators to those institutions if needed.
Yes, and we would have also for all those entities that would have had branches in affected areas in Grenada and in Carriacou, would have ensured that the staff, they were able to reach out to their staff and hear from their staff and ensure the staff is okay, and also get an assessment of the conditions at the branch at the time and how they were progressing and the expected timeline for being able to reopen to the public.
We live in a world where there's crooks, gangsters, and it's a mixed experience. Money laundering. What's your role, responsibility when it comes to that?
Well, money laundering is primarily with the AML CFT Commission for general supervisory activities, and the financial investigation aspect, I believe, lies with the FIU. So we are already a prudential regulator, but we would support. So we provide more of a supporting role in terms of AML, CFT. One of the things we would also do is ensure that there are policies in place, and we support the activities of the other authorities here in Grenada for supervision. When Grenada was going through its mutual evaluation, Garfin was there to provide support as well as part of the technical working group for the country.
Are you satisfied, though, as we wrap, that most of your policyholders, your stakeholders, that they satisfied your regulations? International, they say also with international, they comply. There's compliance with international regulations. Are you satisfied that there's that general understanding and appreciation locally of the need to satisfy those arrangements and what we do locally, realizing how we fall into the bigger picture of what happens internationally?
Well, with respect to, we said that Garfin spans, so we do have two departments. I can speak more to the non-bank, and Mr. Fletcher can integrate with the other as well as broader. But yes, with respect to your question, particularly with understanding how global financial changes impact our local economy, yes, we look at that very closely. There are international standards, for example, that credit unions as well as insurance companies have to comply with. We see that there is value in ensuring that they comply with these standards to ensure that we are up to par, that we are not in a vacuum, so to speak, that the quality of the financial performance as well as the financial reporting, that it's where it needs to be, so that those information and those values can be respected. Decision makers can depend on those values, because decisions are ultimately made from what those entities communicate through the language of numerics. So they are required to follow through with those standards. We provide extensive training as well to our internal staff to make sure that we are abreast with those current changes, and that we understand what those changes are, so that when we go to inspect, when we have those prudential meetings, we are speaking from a position of knowledge and understanding what is expected of us. So I think it is safe to say from that perspective, yes, we do extensive work, we train extensively as well, and so we transfer that information out through prudential meetings and so forth. We have a lot of interactions at the highest levels, so that those boards and so forth can get an appreciation as to what we would like to see happening within the local sphere as a result of those impacts globally. So Mr. Fletcher can add as well.
It's the same across all the sectors. What I would also like to add, in other emerging areas like cybersecurity risks, we would have done incident reporting template with instructions was well received, because all the entities understood the importance of having a formal framework for reporting cyber incidents. But we also have made amendments to the Cooperative Societies Act and Regulations, held consultations, and so those are with the Ministry of Legal Affairs. From
Made changes in what context, and how does that impact?
Well, to update the act, right? Because some of these acts have been in establishment for years, right?
Yes.
Practices would have changed, things would have happened internationally. There have been new developments.
Yes.
So to update the act and to modernize the act, if that's the best word.
Yes.
To make it relevant.
Relevant
to modern
today,
times.
Yes.
And we're going to bring back the Harmonized Insurance Act back on the table for regional discussion in 2025.
What is that, as you can explain?
Well, years ago, there was a thought regionally of having one regulator for insurance and pension, one regulator across the ECCU, and there was a harmonized act that went with it. That there were challenges with establishing a single regulator, so that went off the table. And the act, of course, went with it because it made a reference to a single regulator. But there were a lot of good things in that act that was well received by the insurance companies because they understood the importance of updated and refreshed legislation that was closer to current best practices. So we have our executive director would have raised that with the governor, and that's going to be coming back for a discussion and for work in 2025. So in the absence of a single regulator, but the act itself, with all the provisions and all the things that would have been agreed to and worked out with the insurance companies.
Any area you probably want us to just highlight on before we wrap?
Well, just going back to the school savings unit a bit, I mean, Mrs. Munroe spoke about the importance on all the things we're doing in that area. We also have some training coming up for the teacher guides and the principals in November.
Yes,
I think
November. Yes,
in
3
tranches.
in November. 3 chances.
Right.
The eastern side,
The western.
the western, and southern,
St. George's, yes.
and St. George's, yeah. So we're going to be speaking to them about the bylaws, financial record keeping, licensing, all the good stuff to ensure that they are fully aware and ready to run the savings union and protect the children's monies.
Yes.
And that is important. So you parents out there, you should by now feel reasonably comfortable when the child asks you every 2 weeks or every week,
can I join the savings
union? Can I join the savings union in the first regards? And then they remind you that mommy, daddy, I need a $5.
Yes, to put there.
Don't tell them you again with that. You don't know what they're doing with their money. Your money is in good care. And I think that's always a general concern for individuals. You always want to ensure that whatever you when you have to spend it, you know it's being divulged in something that is quite safe. Well, folks, journey's end. This is as far as I can take you. It's exactly 29 minutes on to the hour of 12 o'clock. I'm Randy at the top of the hour is going to be the luncheon edition, a production of our News and Current Affairs Department, and will be presented by Beverly. Tell us what. I almost had a slight senior moment. I was like, oh, what's going on with me? So until then, so long, everybody. JC loves you. Continue as I encourage you. Continue to live life and love life. Treat each day as it's your last day on planet Earth. You live, you wake up, you realize you're still here. Here's what you do. You start living all over again. Goodbye to those of you in television. To those of you that is on radio, we'll continue with you up until about 10 minutes onto the hour. Until then, so long, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right.